Hello, I'm Mark Price. I'd like to talk to you today about how little things mean a lot. There was a man who died and went to heaven, and he's met by St. Peter, and St. Peter is walking him through these long corridors, and he comes to a huge room, a very large room, and it's filled with clocks. But the hands on the clocks are all moving at different speeds. And the man asks, he said, St. Peter, why are some of the hands moving very, very slow and some faster? What makes the difference? And Peter said, well, they move at the speed of your sin. In other words, every time someone sins, it moves a little bit. The hands of the clock move. So every time someone sins, it moves. So here are the clocks from around the world. And you have Mother Teresa's clock is right there, and it's moving very, very, very slowly. And Billy Graham's clock very, very, very slowly. And the man said, he says, well, I'd like to see my clock. Is that possible? Simon Peter said, oh, yes, no problem. But we keep your clock, he said, in our office. He says, we use it as a fan. The gospel today, Matthew 13, 31 through 35. Jesus proposed a parable to the crowds. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that a person took and sowed in a field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, yet when full grown, it is the largest of plants. It becomes a large bush, and the birds of the sky come and dwell in its branches. He spoke to them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed with 3 measures of wheat flour until the whole batch was leavened. All these things Jesus spoke to the crowds in parables. He spoke to them only in parables to fulfill what had been said through the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will announce what has lain hidden from the foundation of the world. The gospel of the Lord. So here we have more parables. For the last couple of weeks we've had parables. It's that time of year in the Gospel of Matthew that we're hearing all these different parables. And Jesus, as it says in today's Gospel, talked a lot in parables for a couple of reasons. One, to help people to understand, but also to provide double meanings sometimes as to what he's talking about. In other words, he's talking about the woman using the yeast to put in the bread. But what does yeast do? A little bit of yeast will make the bread rise. It's almost miraculous. So he's talking about how little things can make a big difference. The mustard seed, the small little tiny mustard seed, can grow into a big plant, they say 30, 40, 48 inches tall, and enough for birds to come. Who would believe that a little seed would produce such a large plant, a large bush? And Jesus said big things can happen from little things. But by the way, I know that Simon Peter enjoyed the parables, and I think he wants to tell us something about the parables. So Simon Peter in his own words.
He called me Peter. Me. Well, as I told you, I knew not what he meant. I would come to find with Jesus that he would say many things that I would have no idea what he meant. It would be 3 years later at a place called Solomon's Portico. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I believe with all my heart that Jesus spoke in parables mainly for me. Do you know parables? Stories? Yes, well, I believe that he told stories mainly to help me to understand. And may I confess something to you? Most of the time, I didn't understand the parable. Do you have that problem? Yes? Here's what I did. I will tell you. I would go to him and I would say, Jesus, yes, wonderful story. I said, may I speak with you privately? I always wanted to go privately because I didn't want the others to know I didn't know. And we would go around someplace where we could be private, and I would say, now, explain this to me. Faith the size of a mustard seed could move mountains. Explain that to me. And do you know, each and every time he would take whatever time was necessary to explain it. And then when he finished, I'd say, oh, yes, of course, I understand. Yes, small faith, big mountain move. Yes, I understand. And I'd walk away, and half the time I didn't even understand his answer. but I didn't let him know that.
There you have it, Simon Peter didn't understand the parables, and guess what? Neither do we a lot of the times. But the ones today that we're listening to, I think, are worth hearing because they truly are saying to us that little things, whether it's a little bit of yeast or a small little mustard seed, can make all the difference in the world, can change things. Mother Teresa said none of us can do great things, only little things with great love. And that's what we're called to do. There was a young boy in Ohio who was who had been burned 80+% of his body, and he wasn't supposed to live. They said that his chance of living is very, very poor. And so day in, day out, the boy in the hospital just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And one day, the boy's teacher showed up, and she brought a whole stack of books. And she went to the boy's bed and put the books on the nightstand there next to his hospital bed and sat down in the chair. And she said, look, I brought you your books. You're getting way, way too far behind in school. If you don't get caught up on your homework, if you don't get caught up on your studies, you're never going to catch up. So you really need to get focused on these books and on your homework assignments. Well, interestingly, the story is that the boy started to get better the very next day. And each day he progressively got better and better and better until he was able to finally leave the hospital. And everyone was amazed, the doctors, the nurses, the parents. And one day the parents asked the boy, what happened? Why did you all of a sudden change and go from being very bad to being a person who got healed? And the young boy says, well, I'd lay in that bed and I'd hear you, Mom and Dad, and the doctors and nurses talk about how I'm going to die. And the burns are so bad that I'm going to die. And so I believed you. But when my teacher brought me the homework, he said, Mom, Dad, you don't give homework to someone who's going to die. A little thing that meant a lot. By the way, that's one of the many reasons we need to get these schools open, because teachers on a daily basis do millions and millions of little things that mean a lot in the lives of our children. We need to get the kids back. We need to get the schools open so that those millions and millions of little things can enhance and change for the better the lives of our children. Amen to that? Also, I want to make a comment. Today in the news, as I'm here on July the 27th, 2020, the news is all about the death of Congressman John Lewis. John Lewis was a black man who was with Dr. Martin Luther King. He'd been beaten many, many times in the 60s in his younger years. He had been arrested in between 1960 and 1972, 40 times he was arrested. And each time he was beaten and he was arrested, it was for his protesting in peace, either sitting down like we used to call in the 60s sit-ins, or trying to get into a restaurant that was for whites only, or get onto a bus that was whites only, or the bus driver would say to the back of the bus so he'd sit in the front of the bus. He was a man who believed that change was necessary, and he believed that little things meant a lot. In other words, I'll just sit in the front of the bus and see what happens, because eventually this world has to realize that we're all children of God, and we should all be able to sit wherever we want on the bus or go into whatever restaurant. So he represents change through peace. Change through peace. He gave the speech right before Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. He was very close to Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. I'm a fan of the comedian entertainer Sammy Davis Jr. And he used to talk about his life. He's a black man who grew up in the South. He grew up understanding what segregation was all about. And he's also a man who changed his religion. He had a conversion from Christianity to Judaism. And he used to tell the story about getting on a bus, and the bus driver would say, to the back of the bus. And he'd look at the bus driver, and Sammy Davis would say, but I'm Jewish. And the bus driver would say, off the bus. Now that's a joke, and we can laugh, but it points a finger at one of the problems that exists in the world. And that is, there is prejudice, there is racism. I do not believe that there is systemic racism in this country, But there are people who are racist. There are people who have prejudice, but it is not systemic. We would not have elected for 8 years, 2 terms, a black president. So in little ways, John Lewis made huge differences, huge strides in human rights. Sammy Davis, through his humor as an entertainer, made large differences in the world that we know. So I want to say to you in this reflection that little things mean a lot. Little things that we do in our lives. All the little things we do for the people God has put in our lives. We don't even know. We don't even know most of the time the catalyst of things, like a ripple. You throw a rock in the water and it ripples out. We don't even know all the benefits that come from that little smile we gave, or that little affirmation that we showed somebody or gave somebody, the mercy we showed somebody else. So if we, in our mind and our heart, try to be, as Mother Teresa said, Christ to other people, if we really truly understand what Mother Teresa means when she says, none of us can do great things, only little things with great love, we can be people who, through the little things that we do in our life, can make big differences for those around us. Amen? This is Mark Price. Thanks for listening.